So this is the closest I will be to feel like Franco Corelli, right, in terms of opera. How do you feel? After listening Chiara from Fondation CRT saying the crisis, media, democracy, and listening to Otto describing the structural problems in there, how do you feel this morning? Did you feel like me this morning and waking up and saying, what can I do? What can one do? And so forth. What I'd like to bring you to in the next 10 minutes is a way of looking at things, a prism about, perhaps there is a way of looking at this. Not a perfect way, not a magic bullet, but another way, a way that probably genders hope. First of all, I want to thank Otto for presenting theory. It'll be useful for here in terms of a path for social transformation. But my story starts, I started my career as a war reporter, and then I moved to the business side of media, and to make a long story short, this is how I melded these two: impact investment, social investment, call it what you want, in the field of independent media. So, my story starts 30 years ago. It was in a dim room in Prague. It was right in front, a dim room in front of the beautiful astronomical clock in Prague. And in that meeting in 1995 were two journalists coming out of Slovakia, from Bratislava, and saying that they were being oppressed by Mitchell, the government, oppressed to the point that they couldn't find anything to print, oppressed to the point where they were stopping the reporting of what the public discourse was starting in Slovakia by calling advertisers and cutting their money off. And there was another crazy idea in the room. The other crazy idea in the room was my organization, the idea that we could, as an NGO, not give a grant, but actually fund this independent voices, not just in Slovakia, but in the rest of the world. And we did. And my contention is that printing press, which actually got funded by that, was an act of defiance. In a way, it was shifting the whole entire public discourse in Slovakia. It wasn't just about one newspaper starting. It's now the second largest group in Slovakia, in other difficulties 30 years later, but it was an act of defiance. And what I'd like to do with you is to challenge the sacred assumption that systemic change needs systemic scale. I don't think it's necessary. I think we live in a moment of obsession with scale. You know, billions are organized to be able to change. The SDGs are trying to change continents' paradigms, countries' paradigms in terms of what we do. We measure impact on millions. Again, I repeat myself. And then you've seen this slide before, and I thank Otto for bringing it up. But it's just something that's very dear to the way we look at things, and probably to the prism I was referring to at the beginning. I realize it's a repeat, but I would like this to sink in terms of the way you might want to look at things as long as when you go to the coffee break. Truly, Prigozhin, I repeat what Otto said, basically, from a chemical point of view, discovered that one little small part of a chaotic chemistry system can actually have a change in the whole system, can actually provoke something. And this isn't poetry. This is thermodynamics. And this is something in MDIF we've applied for a long time. And maybe it's a way, those small islands of coherence, to how complex system can actually transform. And at MDIF, the small NGO I mentioned as a crazy idea, this is what we've been doing. So all these little small islands of coherence are not the places where we invested, but let me give you three. Malaysia Kini in 2002, the Mahathir government was controlling pretty much all the All the outlets, editor-in-chief, were being controlled weekly on what they were going to write. And suddenly comes this young team of people saying, well, we'll put something online because there was an opening in the law with the superhighway at the time in the five tigers of Asia. Let's try to put something on. And they became one of the most vocal voices of politics accountability in Malaysia. To the point where literally when elections would happen in the past 10 years after 2002, even people opposed to the independence of media that Malaysia Kini was representing would go there to find out what was the result of the election, what truly was happening, to the point of dropping down their servers. B92 in Serbia, a sort of a beacon in the middle of the Milosevic regime, and after all the turmoil, they were small radio stations that were actually offering another view than the narrative which we proposed at the time, a pro-war narrative, a pro-nationalist narrative, something we're hearing today. And finally, another example of a small islands of coherence is my friend Jose Ruben Zamora in Guatemala, who is now in prison since almost 2 years, for exactly putting accountability when nobody wanted to talk about cervix cancers of women in the indigenous mountains. He did. And it had a resonance effect. And sometimes it's not a system change or a policy that will do that, but small islands of coherence have resonance, and I'll come back to that in a second. I'm obviously going backwards. Everybody following? Yes, I am going backwards. So let me do it again. No. Oh, I've got it. I think the two slides I wanted to share with you is that I think I'm challenging the notion of scales because it's essentially, it's sort of an ideological word of saying, is it scale or resonance? I think a lot of the conversation I've had with the social impact investors and so forth are looking for top-down, they're looking something replicable, something almost Newtonian in terms of linearity. I would contend that small islands of coherence, the logic, functions with a different way, probably closer to what quantum logic would bring to, something that is a little bit more diverse, a little bit with what Otto was speaking of, and saying, looking at the future as it emerges you, looking at it from another way than just linearity. And I think that if we only look at the notion of scale, my contention is that perhaps maybe that we're discovering a blind spot in terms of how it is done. Oh, bravo, Patrice. I think, by the way, this is my second Italian references because this, of course, is the Starling's Murmuration from Parisi, which I am grateful for people having taught me. Going back again, I think that if you look at the solutions that are offered to us in terms of scales versus resonance, it also speaks to itself. The EU Green Deal, the SDGs are important. They are comprehensive, they are coordinated, and they are linear. I would like to think that islands, as I've said earlier, are strategic, catalytical, and non-linear. And I think that, in a way, our 30 years of experience with these three examples, but also the 171 little media small islands of coherence that we funded in these countries, were not actually strategic. And I would say that they were not accidents. They were, in a way, something that fueled the notion that one small part of a chaotic system can actually have an impact. You've seen this slide in a much nicer way to Otto. So what we did at MDIF is we had this sort of notion that small islands were important. But what was missing was a methodology that gave us intention. And this is when we discovered the extraordinary work of Otto Scharmer and Theory U. And you've seen all this in a much nicer way. I need to update this, Otto. But in terms of all the field in which the operating systems are being updated every time. And I think what we're going to do at MDIF is what we'd like to do after looking at 30 years of small islands of coherence is to look at how this could apply itself, as you saw, with health, agriculture, education, finance, business, and so forth. What will be the next system for information? We're at the middle, in line of all the crises we've said, we're at the middle of a massive change. Today, in 2025, information has to be considered as a public interest information must be considered as an infrastructure. This is our contention, and we are discussing this using this framework to basically say we cannot just look at it from an extractive logic at the beginning of the business of the Corantos in the 17th century. We have to go down to look at it more and more towards something that goes towards the commons, what we need to function as a society. Remember yourself, I don't know about you, but when COVID struck, and I speak this very carefully because we are in Italy and we are in north of Italy of what happened at the beginning of this seismic change, we didn't know. Should you send your children to school or not? And I think that was a huge wake-up call on a huge catastrophe. That public interest information is actually an infrastructure that you need, whether you are in Malaysia or whether you were in Switzerland where I was. So that's where we're going. And we will be looking into creating, I think the way I would frame this one is that we've got 30 years of small islands of coherence, but I was very touched once again by Otto's point of saying the future is something that comes at you, and it's how you react to it that's important. And the way we're going to react to it is to create a laboratory in Paris, not for media, not typical media, which is pretty much occupied by me, my cast, the journalists, and so forth. But what can we learn from other fields, whether it be biology, anthropology, whether it be sociology, and so forth. So we are launching this in 2026, an information for the commons that allows us to have prototype. But most importantly, and this is another message which we find very important for theory review, is to let go of the past assumption that only journalism and media can do that. Imagine for someone who's been working in journalism for 30 years, saving them to try to find a new narrative. Let's skip this one. So, I'll end on 2 slides, 2 points. First of all, I think what's in front of us, as we think about how we want to react, what prism we want to use, is perhaps to choose what do we want to do? Do we want to build continents? Or do we want to build islands? And I think that what I said earlier about the scalable models of the EU Green Deals and so forth, it's not that they're not necessary, they are. They're just not sufficient. And I think we need probably to look at perhaps another way by giving ourselves hope in a way that actually small islands may actually have an impact on the whole system. One of the things, and I'll leave you on this now, one of the things I really like about what Prigogine wrote, and allow me to quote him, and that goes back to my point of what we should think in the morning, is that it teaches us in a way that we're not victims of chaos. We shouldn't be victims. We shouldn't wake up in the morning, what can I do? But rather we are potential creator of a higher order. Pretty much what Otto was saying in his work is to say, it's coming at you and it depends on you. And I think this is important for all. I think the physics are there, it's thermodynamics, the evidence is sort of there, the methodology is available. I think only is missing is our willingness to believe that small, done strategically, can actually be a powerful force for change. And one last point. What I really like about this concept, it's not going to change necessarily tomorrow, but the idea of small islands of coherency, it's not just about the work that needs to be done by change makers, which was amazing, as you saw. I was listening to that, and they were all small islands of coherence that has amazing resonance, which we'd not forget. But it's also something that comes down to you, personally. Start today, and you've probably started, not just on an institutional, if you have a small social enterprise, but literally in every step you do when you talk to people, where you're in the street, the way you look at things. If we all become small islands of coherence, I do believe that the accumulation, as Otto says, of all these forces may actually stop us from being too depressed in the morning and having a little bit of hope. Thank you.